It's like we're back on lines, so to speak.
We are starting. Okay, so delighted to be in this magical city. And let me introduce myself again, even though Mary Lou introduced me, but that was a few minutes ago. I'm Sara Clavero. I am leading the Gender X team at Technological University Dublin, TU Dublin. You are going to see more of myself in these 5 days. So the main purpose of this section is to go through basic concepts and definitions. Now, I have to say, I don't like very much concepts and definitions, okay? The reason for this, especially with very complex concepts like gender and the differences between gender and sex, is that a definition always will leave something out. So in order actually to get familiar and to learn about sex, gender, the integration of sex and gender in research, the key is practice, okay, rather than learning definitions. But why did we include this session? We include this session because we are well aware that there are people here who are not familiar with these concepts, and there are other people who are experts and who have a lot of experience already in these concepts, working with these concepts, etc., etc. So what these definitions do is just to provide a mapping. And I'm going to be, like these definitions, as I said, these concepts are complex and they are contested. So there is not one definition of gender that is contested, as is contested the relationship between sex and gender. So I'm not going to go here because I only have 20 minutes. And can I keep on speaking?
Yes.
We only have 20 minutes here, and actually my kind of goal is going to make it shorter than 20 minutes, because we have Professor Thomas Braga after. So to make up some time. Okay. And in this gender school, you will have the chance to get that practice and also to work through questions about what is the gender dimension, the sex and gender dimension in research, when to integrate the sex and gender dimension in research, in what stage, how to do it, what are the main tools, what's important. Okay, so I'm not going to go through these questions. Okay, so I'm just concepts and definitions. And yeah. Okay. So I'm going to very briefly provide standard and simple, as I said, definitions of sex and gender, and also of intersectionality. And I will explain why intersectionality is there, because it is becoming more and more important, actually becoming a requirement in research funding, as you will hear in this gender school, especially on Friday, that we will have a round table. Gender bias research, the main reason why it is important to integrate sex and gender dimension in research because of a historical gender bias, and sex and gender dimensions in research. I have to speak louder. Okay, thank you, Salma. Okay, sex and gender. What are the differences? Well, some of you, or many of you may have heard already that sex is all about biology, okay? It refers to the biological attributes that distinguish male, female, and intersex hermaphrodite. Hermaphrodite is a term that is used more for animals, even though an intersex is a kind of chromosomal differences, but also actually there are intersex animals, you know. I was looking at articles and there are very interesting research on intersex domestic pets. Okay. Sex usually is defined according to the following characteristics: genetic sex, determination, like chromosomal, gametes, and morphology, both primary and secondary sex characteristics. Primary sex characteristics, for instance, will be reproductive organs, both external and internal, and secondary will be secondary attributes linked to that, or that we usually linked to this, even though they are not necessarily linked, about, for instance, muscle, width of pelvis, breast, etc., etc. Okay. In engineering and product design, in this kind of practices and disciplines, in that research, sex includes anatomical and physiological characteristics that may affect the design of products, systems, and processes. Think of cars, okay, and seat belts, etc. Just to give an example. So summarizing, sex is all about biology. Okay, put in a simple way. Gender, on the contrary, is about culture. And many of you may have heard of this. These are the sociocultural factors that shape identities. How do we perceive ourselves as behaviors and attitudes, and therefore actions. Okay. Gender is multidimensional. When we talk about gender, usually we refer to gender identity and gender expression, but it also involves other dimensions. Gender identity is how we perceive ourselves as, according to gender norms. And also the gender expression, which is different, is how we present ourselves and how we communicate that to others. Gender roles and norms, there are rules, the rules that are in society, in different spheres of society, the family, in the state, culture, labor market, etc., that determine behaviors and attitudes and expectations. And so there is a lot of research looking at gender norms in society. Then there is gender relations, how we interact, how persons interact according to gender, interact, for instance, in the sphere of family life, in the workplace, and again, in different spheres. And institutionalized gender, when we talk about gender and institutions, usually we refer to power and how power is distributed in the economy, in politics, in education, like in academia and universities, according to power. So gender is multidimensional. There are different dimensions of gender, but also gender is a kind of spectrum, I would say. Okay, so whether sex, we have female, male, then we have intersex. So gender is more of a spectrum. And it is a spectrum because also these kind of dimensions, they don't. So first, it is a mistake to necessarily link gender with sex in the sense of feminine with female, masculine with male, because it's not always like that. There are many different genders. And also because there are differences, for instance, between, there can be difference between gender, my gender identity and my gender expression. Okay, which is again different to my sex, defined like that. Well, I cannot see. Why?
Can you maybe advance the slide and maybe we'll come back to this? That's what sometimes it just freaks out or. Show it up.
Ah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so there you have a kind of summary, and it includes, different aspects of gender and also sex, because we haven't speak about sexual orientation, which is also different kind of concepts. So gender expression is the way we communicate, a person communicates their gender identity to others by the way they dress, they act, or they refer to themselves. Yes, the word says it all. Gender identity is a person's internal sense of being a man or a woman or anything in between. We said gender is spectrum. There is sexual orientation, sexual attraction, a term to describe sexual and or romantic attractions to others. And again, these are all different. They don't necessarily coincide, okay? And then sex is the labels, male, female, intersex, given to someone at birth based on their biological determinants. Intersectionality. Some of you may have heard before this term, intersectionality, and it is important when we are here looking at the integration of sex and gender in research, because lately there is a gradual kind of move towards intersection, the integration of intersectional kind of dimensions, okay, and taking an intersectional approach to research analysis. And the reason why this is, and sometimes you may hear similar expressions, similar terms like gender plus, which is not exactly like the same as intersectionality, but as I said, I don't want to go into this complex because kind of differences, because we are going to see them in the remainder of this gender school. So intersectionality, very simply put, describes overlapping or intersecting categories such as gender, sex, also ethnicity, age, socioeconomic status, sexual orientation, and geographical location, just to name a few, because there are more, that inform individuals' identities and experiences. So my gender may inform. It is important for me because it informs certain experiences, but then my socioeconomic status, it has to be, if we look at the intersections between my gender or my socioeconomic status or my nationality, I'm a foreign national in my university. In a way, my experiences are shaped by these multiple kind of identities and how they intersect. And how they intersect depends on the context. So they may intersect in one particular way in my university, and they intersect in a different way if I'm in another context, like in my own country, with my friends. Okay. As I said, there is more and more, intersectionality is more and more practiced and even required in research. And it is the idea that gender and sex should not be considered in isolation, because if we do so, we may be blind and we may be leaving very important factors behind. Gender identities, norms, and relations are shaped by other social attributes. You have there some of the different aspects of discrimination, but they're okay. Well, suddenly something came in bold, so my formatting, for some reason, when I sent it to Salma, that is the Outlook tricks, sending emails. Gender bias research. Why research is gender bias? This is a historical problem that comes from way back. And it is the idea that males and their actions and artifacts as well are overrepresented as subjects of research in all the disciplines, okay, social and natural sciences. And this overrepresentation is not, in a way, it's not justified. It is based on stereotypes, okay, on gender stereotypes. So when do we have gender bias research? We have gender bias research when we are blind to differences, gender differences. That is also called gender blind research, okay? And this is when scientific research does not consider sex or gender differences and treats male as the norm, as it has happened historically. But what they do, this research, what it does, it is generalize that male norm to the population as a whole, okay? So one example, one very popular example that you may have heard before, it is research on heart attack symptomatology, mainly on males, and generalizing that to the population as a whole, disregarding that women's symptomatology, heart attack, is very different. So by ignoring those differences, the harm is enormous. The harm done to women, because many women actually have died as a result of misdiagnosis. But also we have gender bias research, and when we treat, for instance, women and men entirely, and other genders entirely different, assuming that they are entirely different because we are applying our gender stereotypes, when certain research questions are only seen as this is relevant to one gender, but not to the other, okay? So that assumption of, well, of gender doesn't matter and we are not, and then we take the male norm because of our stereotypes and then generalize because they are not different. That is one problem, but also the problem of kind of accentuating the difference too much, also based on our stereotypes. So this is what we are trying to prevent, because the result of this gender bias research and this long history of gender bias research is that the research, as a result, it harms the validity, the accuracy of research, but also it can do a lot of harm to entire populations. Okay. Sex and gender dimensions in research, what it is to integrate. I'm not going to speak. Thomas is going to speak a lot about that. And in all these gender schools, through case studies, you are going to hear different case studies from different disciplines. We are going to work in very different ways on this. What is the sex and gender dimensions of research and how to do this and why we should be doing this. So to integrate, we integrate a sex and gender dimension in our research when sex, gender, or other attributes, intersectionality, okay, and we take those as well, are part of the research design and are systematically controlled for throughout the research process in all the steps, from the point that we have wonderful idea, okay, all the way up to the communication of our results. It doesn't mean that gender has to be, or intersectionality, the main focus of analysis, okay, in our research, but that it is taken into account. It's not that we are here pretending to turn you all into gender researchers. One thing is to gender research, That is part, is gender studies, gender research, and another thing is the integration of gender, sex, in dimensions and research. Integrating a sex and gender dimensions in research does not necessarily mean focusing on sex and gender differences, okay? And that we said before, and maybe, focusing too much in differences, we may be applying our own gender stereotypes. But how the idea is how they might be relevant in the context of a given study, in the context of your study. How it is important to take those into account, how they are relevant, and what it is entails when we take gender differences. In terms, for instance, of impact, of results, etc. So I think that's it. Yeah, thank you very much.